Let me change one setting here. Oh, okay, it is recording now. So just so you know, this is being recorded and we'll post it on the YouTube channel. And then let me fix something in meeting settings. Okay, it's not giving me the option. Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I think more people will be trickling in. If you guys notice people in the lobby, please let me know, because sometimes it doesn't tell me while I'm going, and I don't know how to turn it off. It's not letting me change that setting now. Oh, here we go. Everyone, let's see if that works. Let me. Okay, I think I turned off the lobby, so people should just be able to come in. All right, so let's get started. Today we're going to talk about time and effort tracking. And it's not just for 5310 operating assistance. This is kind of best practices for any federal grants that you're receiving. So we will dive into what time and effort is. There's a lot we can cover, and it was hard for me to decide what to leave out and what to cover, because you can get into fringe benefits, and you can get into leave of absence and how to track that. So I decided we'll just do like an overview, and then if there are things that we didn't cover that you have questions about, maybe we could do that in a different lunch and learn. I also really wanted to show some tools, some free online tools like Clockify. So at the end, if we have time, I will show that. Otherwise, the link will be in the slides, and you can just look it up later and see if it would help. Hopefully we have time to get to that and I can show you how to use it. Okay. 1 second. Is it not letting me change sides? Okay. Let's see if I can put this down here. Sorry, screen management is always an issue when doing these presentations. Okay, there we go. Now I can see you guys, my slides, everything. So we are here today to talk about what is time and effort tracking. Basically, time and effort tracking is the process of documenting how employee hours, salaries, or hourly pay is charged to a federal grant. It ensures that labor costs billed to a grant accurately reflect the actual time worked on specific, in accordance with 2 CFR 200.430, which we will get into later, more deep dive. Your records need to accurately reflect the work performed, account for 100% of an employee's compensated time, and be supported by an internal control system, and also be maintained and available for an audit or a federal triennial review or something similar. Why does it matter for 5310 operating assistance? Time and effort tracking is important for employees who bill anything to federal funding, but also if you have multiple programs, different projects, different funding sources, which we will call split funded, and we will get into that more. But it is also required for employees working 100% of their time on a single grant to verify eligibility for salary reimbursement. It is critical for federal grants because personnel costs are often the largest expense charged to a grant, and federal regulations require proof that those costs are accurate, allowable, reasonable, and tied to grant-funded work or an allowable expense to be charged to that grant. And it matters because we want to comply with the federal regulations. We want to avoid audit findings. And then our objective today is to help you 5310 subrecipients, or maybe you're recipients of other federal fundings, understand that federal requirements, what the federal requirements are for time and effort tracking, and how to accurately document staff time that you charge to the 5310 program for reimbursement, and how to implement some tools to help you and what the best practices are that will support compliance and help you be prepared for an audit. When is time and effort required? Anytime salary, wages, or wages are being reimbursed from a federal grant, especially relevant for 5310 operating assistance invoices that you send to us for reimbursement. And it does apply whether employees are fully or partially funded. Now, we may not always check for or require you to submit time and effort with your invoices as backup documentation. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing it. And we will kind of discuss why that is, how it's worded in the federal regulations. And if you're not doing it, like, should your agency look into this? Why is it important? We're going to go over all of that. So federal regulations require that salaries and wages are supported by documentation that shows how employees actually spend their time. And without this documentation, charges to the grant can be deemed unallowable during an audit. So even if we looked at your backup documentation and we said, yep, that looks good, and we approved it, during an audit, if they come and ask, can we see your time and effort, and you don't have it, they could determine that it's unallowable, and you could have to do what's called a payback, where you pay back the federal government for what you received. That's rare, but it can happen. So there are three pieces when it comes to salary and tracking that you must have. And this doesn't mean you must have it to submit invoices to us, right? We typically just require your payroll, and then like a timesheet, or, it depends, like maybe check stubs, something to prove that you paid those employees, and then what you're paying them for. Time and effort can be even more in depth, and this is more for your records, and for an audit, it may be requested. We do love to see it when you include it with your backup documentation, but it's not technically a required piece of our backup documentation that we ask for. We do, however, if you've had a site visit, you should know that we have asked, and we do ask, how do you track time and effort? How do you track your staff's pay separate from other grants? And we ask those types of questions. So you have to be ready to answer those questions and show more backup documentation if it's requested from an auditor or a triennial reviewer, or even our compliance officer if they're doing a site visit. So time and effort is the second piece of what you must have. And then the third piece is charging the cost to your grant. So we'll talk about that a little more, but for example, let's say that I charge all my operating expenses to my budget, right? Okay, but 2 years later or a year later, I'm requesting reimbursement for those operating expenses with the federal grant. If that's not shown in your books, that could be a finding. So make sure that you're showing like an offset to the money you're getting back to cover those operational expenses, or that could be a finding in an audit. So we'll talk more about what these words mean, personal activity reports, that kind of thing, and I'll show you some examples. but I just wanted to kind of break out those three pieces. Um, there's a lot of different ways you can show these items, but this is generally the three pieces that you need. So we're going to talk about some key terms. Time and effort certification, which we've already gone over a little bit, but I'll give you a definition on the screen. Cost objective, split funded versus 100% grant funded, personnel activity reports, and reasonable compensation. Time and effort certification is a formal statement by an employee and typically approved by a supervisor or signed by a supervisor, confirming how their time was spent on a specific grant-related activity during a set period. It's required when an employee's salary is reimbursed by federal grants. Now, there are different requirements for different types of employees or different best practices, I should say. And we will talk about that more. The cost objective is a specific grant, project, or funding source that an employee works on and charges time to. So an example is the 5310 operating assistance from your 5310 grant, or maybe you get funding from a local Meals on Wheels program or a different federal grant. So you have to be able to show that if I'm working on different projects and charging them to different grants or different pots of money, I have to be able to show an auditor how I track that and how I'm charging my time to different cost objectives. And we'll talk about some tools and different ways you can do that. Split funded versus 100% grant funded. 100% grant funded is the employee works only on one grant or cost objective. That type of stuff doesn't require as much paperwork. It's simple to certify. You could do an annual time and effort certification, or you can just show, yeah, they only work on this project. That's a lot easier. Split funded means that the employee works on more than one grant or funding source or cost objective, and you need to show a detailed time and tracking to show how their time is divided. And we'll talk about some examples, but basically like a mobility manager is a good example. If they're charging, no, maybe it's not. A mobility manager could be 100% grant funded. So let's say a driver. Let's say you have a driver who is also a regular staff member and just sometimes they drive for the program, but other times they're not. That would be split funded. So that requires some more detail, more time and effort certifications, and we'll talk more about that. Personnel activity reports. This is one of those things that you can use to show that second piece, which is the time and effort, and it's not the same as payroll. A timesheet-like document showing the actual hours or percentage of time that an employee worked on each cost objective over a given period. So these are mainly used for split-funded staff to show the time and effort tracking. This is one example that I found online. There are many different examples and templates online that you could find and use. I liked this one because it was pretty simple. It shows, the date, you put your times, hours, percentage of time, and then sign in date, and the supervisor signs in dates. This one is a 2-week period. You could do that. You can do monthly. Like I said before, if it's like a salary employee, you could just do a certification once a year. Now, is Kronos a time and effort certification? Technically, that's showing your time and effort, but it's not a certification unless your supervisor or manager is signing off on it. If you can show something like this online on an online system, you could definitely do that. This one allows for multiple positions at the top, you'll see. So you could have multiple drivers, different funding sources, and that kind of thing, and then sign off on it. So this is more of a physical thing, which might be a little more time consuming, but then you would want to save this in a file so that if you're audited, you can pull this to show that yes, we have payroll, but then also they're certifying that that is when what they actually worked and that it's accurate and reasonable. So that's just one example. Reasonable compensation. What does that mean? The federal government uses that term a lot in the circulars. So I just wanted to talk about how do you show an auditor that what you're paying your employees is reasonable. And there's a few different ways that you can do that. Compensation is reasonable if it's consistent with the amount the subrecipient pays for other work. So I pay one driver $15 an hour and then I pay another driver $30 an hour. That could be deemed not reasonable if they're doing the exact same work. If you don't have similar work within your organization, compensation is reasonable if it is comparable to what is paid for similar work in your labor market, with which includes your area. So if you can show that, like how you determined that the pay was reasonable based on what the average pay in your area for that type of job is. You can also do salary surveys. They're not required, but it's another good practice to do. Um, you can show different salary scales. You can purchase industry surveys that they've done, or you could also hire a consultant to do your own if it was, if you were doing like a big hiring and you wanted to make sure that you were meeting the industry standards. And then down at the bottom, I've put where you can find more information about reasonable compensation within the federal circulars and where it talks about those. So 2 CFR 200 and 45 CFR 75. And then we're going to talk about federal requirements for a little bit. So it is a little bit confusing, right? Do the federal requirements state specifically time and effort is required and this is how you need to do it? No, not technically. Sorry, my dog's barking. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay, sorry. Um, they're never gonna tell you this is exactly how you need to do it because there's so many agencies that receive federal funding and they all do things different. So they want to give you flexibility to do it however your agency deems is best for the type of work that you do. But they will say what your records must show. So we will talk about that. And I do want to say that time and effort certification is a best practice within the industry of federal grants. But technically what the federal requirements say is this: records must reflect actual time worked. So that's pretty vague of how are you going to prove actual time worked? Records must reasonably account for total activity, which means you can't just show, oh, this person spent 50% of the time doing this, and that's what you submit. Because, okay, but your payroll shows that you are paying them for 100% of time. And yes, you only charged 50% of time to the grant maybe, but we need you to account for all of that activity. What was that employee doing when they weren't working for this grant? So your time and effort certification should account for everything that they did. So if it's split funded, you should record how all of their time was applied to different grants. And again, we don't need that to reimburse your invoice, but an auditor needs to see that. So an auditor is going to look at, are you accounting for 100% of their time? Or are you recording everything that they did? And then your records must be supported by internal controls. Um, so basically that you're following your rules and regulations and you're following your documentation standards. Um, maybe if you have reconciliation rules, that those vary by agency. So they're just going to check that you're following those. Whatever you say you're doing that. And we could go way more into this, but I want to save on time and make sure we get to everything. So again, if there are topics that we can't dive into today that you need more information on, let me know. We could always do another lunch and learn, but like fringe benefits and paid leave and things like that, we're not going to dive too much into today and this kind of thing, just because we don't have time. So I'm going to give you some real world examples. So the first one is 100% grant funded. So let's say George is an hourly driver. He's paid hourly. His wages are reimbursed 80% by the 5310 funds. Oh, that doesn't make sense. It should be 50%. 50% reimbursed with funds. I think I was thinking capital. He only works on 5310 related driving tasks. He tracks and invoices 100% of his time to the 5310 project, but only 50% is reimbursed. And that's because his duties are 100% on a single project. So he can use a simple monthly, semi-annual type time and effort certification to confirm that all his work is eligible under the grant. Again, it could be like a PAR, like I showed you, and twice a year, the supervisor reviews it, agrees that the time is accurate, the employee signs that their time's accurate, the manager signs that their time is accurate, and it goes into a folder. And that folder is just for in case of an audit or something where you have to prove and show that you reviewed and agreed that that time and effort was accurate. Another scenario, Sarah is a salary employee and they work as a mobility manager, and their time is split across 5310 operating support, but they also do different admin duties for the agency that maybe aren't related to the 5310 program. And then maybe they have some other grant programs that they're charging time to as well. So her salary is partially reimbursed by 5310 funds. She still needs to track 100% of all of her time across all of those different cost objectives. And let's say that during an audit, Sarah is asked to show 2 years of time and effort documentation. So Sarah provides her time cards showing her total hours and her pay stubs, because that's what she turns in when she asks for reimbursement from the grant. But the auditor would say, this is not enough. The auditor wants more documentation because Sarah needs to show how much time was spent on each project. She needs to certify that the records reflect actual work performed, and she needs that piece of the supervisor signing off on her time and effort, which certifies that it's accurate. So what she should have provided is a monthly personnel activity report or other time and effort log showing percentage or hours worked on each individual project, including 5310. And it should be signed or approved by both Sarah and her supervisor. So I do want to use like a real world tool for a minute. Let's talk about, I don't know if any of you use Kronos, but I had more experience with that. So I'm going to use that as an example. Kronos does show the time part and it shows the project part, but it doesn't necessarily include the effort portion of that. So let's say I have my Kronos report and I'm going to use that as my personnel activity report. I can show in Kronos that I reviewed my time card. I put in my different codes for my different cost objectives and how many hours I worked to each one of those. I approved it, my supervisor approved it, and then it was saved into the server or wherever. But how does that show effort? So there's another kind of a piece of that which you could show different ways, and I'll talk about some different tools. You could have your calendar that has like descriptions of what you worked on those projects, or you could have I don't know if Kronos allows you to put in descriptions. In my experience, it doesn't. So I'm going to show you Clockify, which is a free tool that you can work to go alongside with like your Kronos timesheet that is approved. And then you could have your Clockify report and they could align. Something like that that shows time and effort. Or you have a personnel activity report, you write, what you were doing, the time, your supervisor signs it. So that can cover all of those. But if you're doing everything digitally and you're using something like Kronos, just keep in mind you might want another piece to that, which shows your effort and what you were doing for those projects to prove that you were actually working on them and you're not just making up, oh, I don't know, 5 hours of this project, 5 hours of this project, or I just put 20% to this project all the time. I don't actually track my time. They're going to look for that. So the key lesson here is even if an employee is salary, they must track their time when their wages are charged to federal funds, and general time cards and pay stubs are not enough to meet the audit requirements under Circular 200.430. Okay. And then this is just to summarize everything we just talked about. Why is time and effort tracking important? Compliance with federal regulations. It prevents us from getting audit findings and paybacks. It demonstrates financial integrity and looks good for your risk level. It supports transparency and accountability within the federal government, and it aligns with grant budgets and your work plan, which is in your grant agreement. Okay, I'm going to do a question really quick to see if this is something we need to dive into because I wasn't sure. Do any of you provide incentive compensation to your employees? You can put it in the chat if you want. Let me pull the chat up so I can make sure I can see it. Just tell me if you're A, yes, we use federal funds for bonuses. B, yes, we use non-federal funds for bonuses. C, no, we do not do incentive compensation. Or D, unsure. Put your answer in the chat so I can kind of see, or you could raise your hand if you can't do the chat. C, okay. Is that the consensus overall? I only got one answer. If this is something you don't do with your employees, we don't need to dive into it. Karina? Let me unmute. Do you want me to?
Okay, no, sorry, we don't
No.
do that. But I don't know. I don't see the
Perfect.
chat. I don't see the chat box on here either, to be
That's
honest.
okay. Okay, it seems like the overall consensus is no. So I'm not going to go into that because it's complicated. I just wanted to make sure that people aren't doing that because there are rules to that and how to show it, how to show that it's reasonable. So we are going to skip that for today, which will give us more time to look at Clockify. Okay, pitfalls. These are things you should not say in an audit. Clocking in and clocking out is time and effort. I know what my employees are doing, so my signature is good enough. Position descriptions show what my employees are doing. If I don't charge to my operations budget, the numbers won't add up. So I don't account for the federal money that I'm getting reimbursed. It doesn't offset my budget. We can just say whatever we did later and make it up. Our drivers only work on their grant project during the summer, but we charge uniformly all year. It all catches up, so what's the big deal? Or, of course, our employees are working on the grant project. What else would they be doing? Okay, so these are things you do not want to say when an auditor asks you for your time and effort. Essential elements of a compliant time and effort policy. Okay. Okay, sorry, I muted everyone. Written policies and procedures that are set out to cover the purpose, the requirements, what reasonable means, and how you estimate that your employees are being paid reasonable. Certification penalties for non-compliance. You should also have like a monitoring policy. It could start with a simple checklist and everyone turn in their timesheets. Do you have internal integrity? Do you perform spot checks and internal audits? Are payroll costs aligned with your time and effort reports and in turn aligned with charges to final cost centers or those cost objectives we talked about? And training, that's a big portion. Do your employees understand why they're charging their time to different codes? And do they understand what the consequences of lying on time and effort sheets could be? Okay, now we're getting into the fun part, and we have 30 minutes left. So these are some ideas and resources for time tracking. I should say time and effort tracking, right? Because we talked about the coding systems like QuickBooks and Kronos that tracks time, but doesn't necessarily account for effort if you are a split funded employee. If you're a 100% grant employee, I mean, it's easier because you're just like, they're a driver. They just drive for this program. They're not doing any other activities, right? But if you are a split funded employee, you really need to have a more detailed, accurate record of your time and effort. So just your Kronos or your QuickBooks or whatever your coding system, payroll system is not going to show your effort portion if an auditor asks questions about that. So how can we show effort? You could show your calendar and use different color codes for every different cost objective you're working on in like a detail of what you're doing, but that's maybe not the best and easiest way. So I want to show you Clockify because I think it's pretty cool. Let me see. Okay, so this is an example. So you can import your calendar and have a calendar. Oh, actually, I think it shows, I should have done some because I haven't used it in a long time. Well, let me go clear back. Let's see. Uh, Week? It doesn't do month. When was the last time I used? Let's see. I should have used it to show you some stuff. When was the last time I used it? December 2023. Okay, let's go December. Nothing. Okay, here we go. So as you track your time, it will show into a calendar. So you could use this and print it out to show your time and you can put details. You can also have different projects. So let's say it can even track your budget. So let's say I have a budget of $100, no, $1,000 for 5310 for operating. And then I have $50,000 from another grant for specifically processing applications for my program. And then I have another grant that's funding training and education that I do for my drivers. Okay, this is made up, but I can put in these different categories. I can put how much I have in those different cost objectives, and I can track the hours. So let's say I'm working today. I'm working on driver training. Okay. So I put a description in there and then I select my project or my cost objective. So I'm going to select education. I can even put the client in there if I'm a contractor and I'm doing work for different clients. I can add how much is like you can say if it's billable or not billable so that you know. And then I just hit start and then I go work. And then when I'm done doing my driver training, I can hit stop. Boom, and it saves that. It tells me what time I worked. It puts it on my calendar. And then I can go to my dashboard and it will show me different visual tools of how my time was applied. You can get different reports printed out, summary, detailed, weekly. You can share your time reports with different people on your team or have multiple people on one report if you're a manager. So there's a lot you can do with Clockify and it's all free. It does look like you can upgrade to like a more paid version. But this would definitely be like a allowable operation expense if you're using it to help track grants. And it looks pretty cheap. Basic is $3.99 a month, and it goes up from there. So it's a pretty cool tool. I'm sure there are other tools out there that are similar to this, but this is one that I have used in the past, even just I was trying to use it so that I could update my job description and kind of see where was my time actually being put. Because on our agency's job descriptions, we have to put like percentage of time that you spend on different projects. So to try to get a good idea of that, I was using this as a time tracker tool. So there are many different ways you can use it. I think it's really cool. If I was a contractor working for myself, I think I would definitely use this to keep track of all the different projects and clients that I was working for and what I could bill to different clients. So that's cool. You can add tags too. I don't totally understand how that works. Um, and it does have a timesheet option as well. It does other stuff that like Kronos does too. But if you can't use Kronos to be this detailed and track your time, this is a good thing you could use in tandem with something like Kronos. Okay. Does that, I see someone typing. Does that help? Tags would be what you use when you do certain things for multiple clients. Oh, okay. But you can add that description too, which is nice. Where you can add a description of what exactly you were working on within that category, which is really cool. Because that definitely shows your effort to your supervisor. Your supervisor could improve it and then save it in a file so that if you're audited, you can show what you were doing. So I think that's really cool. Any questions about that? Karina's hand's still up. Is that because you have a question or is it stuck on? It could just be stuck. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. And we still have time. So do you guys have any other questions like um, something I didn't cover? Because since we have a few more minutes, I can talk about Fringe a little bit, if that would be helpful. I'm going to use, okay, I'm just going to tell you about Fringe a little bit and what it says in the circular. Fringe benefits may be assigned to cost objectives by identifying specific benefits to specific individual employees or by allocating on the basis of entity-wide salaries and wages of the employees receiving the benefits. When the allocation method is used, separate allocations must be made to selective groupings of employees unless the non-federal entity, which is subrecipient, demonstrates that costs in relationship to salaries and wages do not differ significantly for different groups of employees. So basically, they're just saying you can charge fringe, but it just needs to be consistent and reasonable. Um, okay. John says ClickUp is also another tool that you can use that's similar to Clockify. So that's one you could look into. Um, we're not going to talk about incentive compensation since you guys don't do that. Severance pay we could talk about if any of you do severance pay. In the case of that, severance pay is only allowable if it's required by law or by an employer-employee agreement or circumstances of that particular employment. So if there's severance pay, you have to prove why, and it has to meet the federal regulation standards. What else could I talk about? Let's see. Did I cover everything? We talked about pitfalls. We could talk about adequate documentation, but I think, we kind of already covered that. States and private grantees, no. Yeah, I think we covered everything. Oh, here's some templates. Let me show you some more templates. This is from MGMA, but they have some examples. So this is their example one for a simple timesheet. And this is typically what we require as backup documentation, just like a simple timesheet or payroll, and then proof of payment, like a check number or something. So that's what a timesheet can look like. Now they do have employee certification down at the bottom. That's more time and effort certification, but I guess, I don't know what they call it, a timesheet. Detailed timesheet is more like this. And then semi-annual certification. So that would be for like a driver who's, it says here, this is to certify that the following individuals have worked 100% of their time during the last 6 months under the cost objective below. It says their position, cost objective, location, and all of that. And then the supervisor signs. I would say this one's not the best because it's missing the employee signature. So maybe here it says employee name, signature, date, and certification language at the bottom. So yeah, you would want that on that one as well. So those are some examples. And then the PAR, which is the one I showed you. Here they do have some electronic systems listed that you could also use. Kronos is one we covered. QuickBooks we talked about. They have a time tracking section. I haven't heard of any of these other ones, but they're out there. Yeah, that's it. Okay, I think we covered everything. Does anyone have any questions about time and effort? Do any of you, are any of you currently doing split funded, or do you typically only reimburse for 100% 5310 grant funded operating salary or employees? I don't know how to do a little survey, so you can take yourself off mute if you want to answer or put it in the chat. No questions? Aprina?
No questions. I guess just responding to we only do 100%. It's too messy to
Yeah,
be
that's
honest
easier.
with you. So we try to steer clear from it.
Okay. Good to know. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. Even if you don't do split funded, I do think it's important to understand, especially if your agency ever comes to you and asks you, hey, can we charge this salary employee's time to your 5310 grant? Then you have some idea of what the rules are, what you would need to do, and maybe what policies you would want to have in place before starting to do that, just to make sure that you cover, the possibility of an audit finding so that you can steer clear of that. All right. Well, thank you all for coming today. And if you do come up with any other questions later, you can email me, and then we will put this recording on the YouTube as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.